97.3 ESPN.com's Michael Kaskey-Blomain. He joins us now with a look at this deal for Philadelphia and some other things that have happened the last couple of days. Michael, what's happening, man?
Nothing really, Mike. Doing pretty well.
All right, MKB on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. So I know this just came out about half an hour ago, but Wilson Chandler to Philadelphia. They get a 2021 pick, it looks like, in the second round. We all know that 2021 draft seems to be a kind of a buzzword here, but the Sixers get an expiring contract and a player for a draft choice. Your thoughts on the deal?
Yeah, Mike, I think it's a deal that makes sense. Obviously, a lot of, pretty much any move that the team makes pales in comparison to, landing a guy like LeBron James. And I think a lot of fans are kind of viewing it through that lens. But if you take a step back, Wilson Chandler is a guy that fills a need for this team. They needed perimeter depth and a guy that could, produce from the wing. He'll fit in nicely in a reserve role behind, Robert Covington. He could maybe play some stretch for. Like you said, it's an inspiring contract, so it's not something that's going to stay on the books. They had the cap space to do it, and they took on, another pick in that 2021 draft that's, already getting buzzed about because of the change potential in the rules. So I think, it's a move that makes sense in the short term and the long term for the Sixers.
Yeah, I mean, the immediate reaction is, okay, what does this mean? Are you involved in Kawhi Leonard? Are you out of that mix? How does Wilson Chandler affect that, if at all?
He's another chip, I think, with it being an expiring contract. I think that's a big part of it. So if there was a potential situation where they were in deep in trade talks with Kawhi, I think it's another potential asset that they could use to include in the deal to make salaries work that would be, not unattractive for another team to take on. So I think, they are still engaged in the Kawhi talks. It seems like at a standstill pretty much at this point in time. But I think that there's certainly that's a factor in it. And if not, then Wilson Chandler is the guy that they could use, in the short term this season and then won't kill them financially moving forward.
Michael, how about the opposite way, that if they don't send Wilson Chandler, he isn't a trade piece, but Rocco or Dario Saric are, because I've heard some description of Wilson Chandler as being like a hybrid of both those players. Is it like insurance if those guys move on?
Yeah, Pete, I think that's another way to look at it. He's a guy that you could plug in at potentially both forward spots. He could probably play some small ball for, and he's, somewhat similar to what Robert Covington in terms of what he brings to the floor. He's obviously not as good defensively as Robert is, but a guy that can play some defense, get out in transition, space the floor a little bit for Ben and Joel. So if there was a trade scenario in which, one or both of those guys in terms of Dario and Covington were moved, in the short term, I think Wilson's definitely a guy that they would feel comfortable plugging into the position to kind of fill in for whatever they lost in that deal.
What's your assessment of his game? Because I've seen the description Swiss Army knife to describe his style of play, but I've also seen you get the good Wilson Chandler and the bad Wilson Chandler. Reportedly, there was a key game in Denver where he went 30 minutes and had 0 points. I mean, didn't we already have that in Covington?
Yeah, that's a great point, Pete. I think inconsistency is definitely probably one of the, the bigger concerns with Wilson Chandler. I think, his game fits in well with what the Sixers are trying to do. He can get out, run the floor, play pretty versatile defense in terms of he's pretty switchable. He can switch off of, most 2s, 3s, and 4s out on the perimeter, which makes it, the defense flow more smoothly. He can shoot a little bit. Obviously, I think he's above around a 34-35% career shooter from distance, I believe. And he's not always going to take it to the basket. He's not a constant guy that's on attack, but he has the capability to put the ball on the floor if he needs to, draw a foul, take it to the rim. So I think he's a guy that will plug in pretty nicely into Brett Brown's system. But like you said, Pete, I do think the main concern with him is you're not sure necessarily on a nightly basis exactly what he's going to give you.
Hey, when you see what's happening around the league, I get it, what's going on out west is just bonkers. But in the East, I mean, now with LeBron out, you would say, this is a 4-5 team wide open race. I mean, Boston's probably at the top, Philadelphia, Toronto. Indiana got better today. They went out and got Tyreek Evans. Would you prefer that the Sixers make a move like this, which is kind of a safer move, kind of kick the can down the road for next year, or with the East being as wide open as it is, would you rather a guy like Tyreek Evans and maybe been a bigger player for the mid-level, the second-tier free agent?
I don't mind what the Sixers have done. Obviously, a guy like Tyreek could have helped in the short term, especially when you look at the deal that he ended up getting in Indiana, 1 year, $12 million. That's definitely something that the Sixers could have, fit in within their current salary cap. But I think this year is really going to be, the coming into the offseason, it was we're going to swing for the fences, try to get one of these guys, LeBron, Paul George, Kawhi. And if not, I think the second plan was something that they feel comfortable in. It's really running it back to a large extent in terms of this team next year is going to go as far as Joel, Ben, and Markelle take them. It'll be their second year, and I think it'll be, a growth year in terms of what they do. So pretty much regardless of who else they bring in, whether it was a Tyreek or it's a Wilson Chandler or it's, Luke Mbah a Moute, anybody short of a Kawhi Leonard, it's not going to move the needle in terms of, how good they can really be in the short term. I think it's going to be a matter of the growth that we see in, Ben, Joel, and hopefully, obviously, Markelle this offseason is huge for him. If he can come in, and be a legitimate producer for the team next year, I think, the moves they make now are more complementary moves. So in the end, it's nice to get that, 2021 pick in terms getting it back and get a guy that can contribute for what they need. So, it's not flashy. Tyreek would have fit, but I understand, kind of their approach so far.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that everybody was fixated on Brett Brown saying we are star hunting. There was a pause there, and he said, or we are star developing. That kind of got lost in the sauce a little bit. So is the star hunting behind them, and their plan is now we're going to go the development route for another year? Because it looks like this is a team that sees the landscape of the league. You ain't winning the championship this year, right? I mean, that's Golden State, and probably again next year it's up in the air. This is a team that's looking at 3 to 5 years for that window to be open for the other teams in this league.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pretty big shift that they made. Like you said, they went in looking for star hunting, meaning they're trying to land, one or two big guys. And then if not, it's a shift to, continue this development and continue on the path of growth. Of course, it would have been great to land a LeBron James. But if not, coming back to a team that won 52 games and went to the second round in their first year together is not a bad thing. And like you said, they definitely are aware of the landscape of what's going on. They're not trying to overspend. So I don't think it's a matter of that the star hunting is necessarily done with, but it might be done with for this particular offseason. They're obviously not going to compromise their books moving forward, to a heavy extent. A lot of any other deals that will get done, obviously like the Wilson Chandler an expiring contract, the JJ deal was another 1 year deal. Any other moves that they do make this offseason will be with keeping future financial flexibility in mind to continue that star hunting. But I guess you could say it's probably been put on hold, and now it looks like the outlook for the season is going to be, the continued development of the stars that they already have on the team, and to see, maybe how far this group can take them in the East before, really trying to add other pieces, considering, like you said, it looks like, short of adding, I don't even know what you could do to compete with the Warriors at this point. It seems like it's pretty much a lock. So, let these guys develop, see what you have, and then next summer we'll be back again, more cap space, and kind of reassess the landscape and go from there.
Yeah, Michael Kaskey-Blomain here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline here, of course, covers the Sixers. And, Michael, I guess the big question that the Sixers probably have to ask themselves internally is 3 to 5 years down the road, do they view Joel Embiid and or Ben Simmons as a player on, I'm not saying LeBron James or Kevin Durant, but that when those guys are coming towards the end, is Ben or Joel, and I would probably lean towards Joel, that level of player that can be the best player on the team that wins a championship?
Yeah, I think they think that both can be, Mike. I honestly believe that they think that they have, especially Brett, who's obviously very, in charge of all the decision-making. I think Brett honestly views both of those players as, foundational pieces. In the short term, sure, they might not be ready to lead a team to a title, and he wants to add, a top-tier talent like a LeBron or a Paul George, like every other team in the league. But I think that he does think there's enough talent on this team for them to be the guys. And I don't, you can't really disagree with him at this point. We obviously need to see more from Ben and more development from Joel. But if you look around, I mean, obviously LeBron and KD are at the top, but if you look at that next tier of superstar, there's no reason to think that, 3-4 years from now that Ben and Joel can't be, at the top. There's obviously other names, Giannis, Karl Anthony Towns. There's other young guys, but there's no reason to think that those two guys can't be the centerpiece of a championship team in the future. They're going to need help, especially in today's NBA. You look at how these teams are stacking up. But I think that there's no sort of panic or rush within the Sixers organization. They had, would have loved to add some top-tier talent, but since they didn't, it's not panic mode. I think they're very happy, to develop the talent they have on the team and go from there.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain with us. Sixers acquire Wilson Chandler from the Nuggets. Now, Michael, we had Mitch Lawrence on yesterday from Forbes, and in his column, he said that other than Cleveland, maybe the Sixers were the biggest losers in free agency. Would you agree with that?
No, Pete. I mean, I really couldn't disagree more. Obviously, best case scenario, you're walking away with a LeBron James, but that was always not necessarily a pipe dream, but that's like setting the bar as high as you possibly could. And then, if you don't get past that hurdle, viewing it as a failure, obviously this team still has some moves to make. But as, we've talked about, I feel like people are kind of rushing for this, to get done. It's not like these other teams in the Eastern Conference necessarily are stacking up. A lot of the stars are moving out west. And I think it's just a matter of how well the Sixers played last year and how far they got kind of sped up the expectation timeline, I guess you could say, to now to the point that, you see a team that's in the second round and you want to say, all right, they need to add X and Y and immediately compete for a title. But in a more organic way, and the past in the NBA before it was this kind of hyper add star immediately mentality. You give a team a couple years to grow and develop, and the future of the Sixers, short of landing LeBron this summer, was always going to be based off how good Joel, Ben, and Markelle can develop to be. So sure, it's a little bit disappointing, I would say, to not necessarily walk away with the targets that you wanted at this time, but to say that they failed, bringing JJ back was a great move. Wilson Chandler is a good move. There's obviously a couple other dominoes to fall to continue to, fill out the roster. But I think, bringing back the core of the starting five of a team that went to, the second round and won 50 games in their first year together is, it's not something to hang your head about.
So Wilson Chandler coming. I know you were high on Bahamute. You wrote about him on our website on 97.3 ESPN. You assume now that's off the table. And then there are people out there that like Tyreke Evans. Like, why couldn't they go get Tyreke Evans instead of Wilson Chandler? But Indiana obviously grabs up Evans. Are there other names out there that you would have been more attracted to than Wilson Chandler, I guess is what I'm asking?
Unfortunately, Pete, I think at this point, and none of the names that they would possibly consider would be, especially attractive that would really move the needle. You're looking at guys, maybe, Kyle O'Quinn was rumored to draw some interest in the team as a potential backup. The Sixers could still bring back Amir Johnson as a reserve behind Joel. With Wilson coming on, most of the salary cap outside of that mid-level exception is now taken up. So the deals you're going to get are going to be, pretty low scale, minimum type salary deals. And the names you're going to get there aren't going to be that exciting. I think at this point, short of a trade that they would make for, maybe a Kawhi Leonard, something like that, I think it's mostly going to be, just kind of filling out the roster at places in need in order to, put Ben, Joel, and Markelle in the best position to really continue to grow and take another step forward this season.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain's with us looking at the Sixers offseason. So let me ask you, Michael, at this stage where they are with what's going on around the league, do you still try to put a package together for Kawhi, or do you just back off of that at this point?
Yeah, Mike, unless, we talked about this before, unless I have a very confident, unless I'm very confident that he's going to, strongly consider or almost guarantee staying in Philadelphia longer than a year. I think at this point it's almost wise to wait. Even if you get Kawhi in the short term for 1 year, you're really going to compete with Golden State. And, what you'd have to give up to get him, what the Spurs are looking to do, I think it's a huge risk. And obviously Kawhi is one of the few talents in the league that's worth taking that risk. He has a relationship with Brett. And if Brett thinks, getting him here will be, kind of a stepping stone to getting him locked up long term, you have to trust him to an extent, but if it's me and it's my assets, I would be, very hesitant to make a move with Kawhi at this point. I don't think it's something that I would necessarily prioritize over developing, the assets that we already have for at least another season.
Michael, the Jared Bayless contract hasn't gone away yet, almost $9 million. What options do the Sixers have now to get out from under the burden of that contract?
Yeah, that's a contract that's really come back to, kind of bite them in the behind, Pete. It's one that they would certainly love to get out from under. They could look to, include that contract in a potential trade as a salary dump. It would, would obviously need to come with another attractive asset to make it worthwhile for the other team to pick up. they could, look to buy him out, which would, count against their cap less, or they could look to stretch the contract so it would count against the cap less for several, the next couple of seasons. But one way or another, I think, he's not going to be a guy that's a contributor for the Sixers next season. And if they could, get something done sooner than later, I think that's something that they would be interested in doing in order to generate a little bit more room on the books for them this summer.
Hey, do you think that 2021 pick, okay, that has been talked about a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Is that something that if you miss out on, Paul George you didn't get, LeBron you didn't get, maybe you back off on Kawhi, is your next star hunting, quote-unquote, plan to utilize that 2021 pick and start making calls for players like a Jimmy Butler maybe who are not happy in their current situations?
Yeah, Mike, but, I don't think it's something they necessarily have to chase. These things happen to kind of just come up organically over the course of time. I mean, if you look back to a year from right now, what the the landscape was, you have, Kyrie Irving, who almost out of nowhere asked for a trade. You obviously have the Kawhi situation. Things kind of just organically pop up over the course of, a season in the league. And I think just having that pick in their pocket, it's not going to lose value, over the next month or year. That pick, the draft is going to gain, only more hype as, kind of it comes in a little bit clearer into the class and whatnot. So I think that's something that obviously there's a reason they got it, and I think that they're very willing to use it as a negotiation tactic. The Jimmy Butler's a very interesting one. It's something I'm sure that, if a phone call would get made, it would get brought up. But I think it's more so something rather than something they're looking to, offload really quickly and kind of call around. I think it's something that they're content for right now to at least have in their back pocket for, future negotiations, whether that would be at the trade deadline this year, next offseason, or, something else later this offseason, whatever the situation may be. I think having it is just kind of a valuable thing to have in the back of their pocket.
Yeah, and obviously Wilson Chandler can be traded, but it also allows you to maybe keep Robert Covington at the forefront of a lot of deals, right?
Yeah, like Pete was kind of saying, it's almost insurance. He's obviously not as good, especially defensively, as Covington, but it's a similar position if for whatever reason, if Covington did get moved and that's a forward spot opened up, I think Wilson Chandler is has a very comparable skill set to Covington in terms of you could kind of slide him right in, get not as good production, but sort of similar. So I think the deal to get Wilson was definitely multifaceted. It's one that, like you said, you could trade him, you could use him as insurance, or worst case scenario, you just use him this year in a reserve role. He comes in and contributes, and then he's off the books next season, and it's back to quote unquote star hunting.
At what point, Michael, you look at a time frame, do you start questioning or scratching your head as to what the Sixers are trying to accomplish is working or it worked?
That's a good question, Mike. I'm always, I'm definitely patient with the quote unquote process, and I think it's something that could happen organically. I would like to see this, like we keep saying, this past year was the first, I view it personally, at least the first year that the team was really trying to contend. I think they did as well as, at least I could have personally expected. I think we all want to see some improvement and, advancement in this next year, especially with the East a little bit more wide open. I think, certainly we don't want to take a step back. I think if we continue, if we have another 50-plus win season this year, continue, getting further into that playoff picture, for me, it's not a success, but it's something that I'm not necessarily questioning it. I think it's, if we're 3 years removed from right now and you and I are still sitting on, talking and they haven't gotten past the second round and, Embiid and Simmons haven't taken those steps into superstardom, I think we have a problem. But for now, I honestly, personally at least, I have no alarm flags about the, the length of time or anything. I think that this, I think it's right on schedule technically of what we really could have expected for the development of young players. And I think, obviously the next season or two will be pretty much, I think you can say, will determine whether or not it could be labeled, I guess, success, the rebuild.
Your take on the LeBron, meeting and whether or not that was, I've heard some people say it was an embarrassment that, that the Sixers even went to the meeting, that it was a bad look that they were there, that they really had no shot. How do you kind of look at them being a part of that meeting?
Yeah, I don't look at it like that at all, Mike. I look at it as a positive thing. Even if he had already had his mind made up beforehand and it was a courtesy meeting that he just took, it shows that he has respect for the franchise. It shows that he has respect for, what they're trying to build here. Obviously, some of the players on the team, in Ben and Joel, think that there was absolutely a level of interest from him and the Sixers, whether it was to the point that he ever, truly legitimately considered joining the team. It's debatable. But it's been, vastly reported that he was intrigued by some of the things they've been doing, and I think he just wanted to get more information. And the fact that, they got a meeting, I think it could be beneficial in the future toward free agency. If the best player in the game is interested in at least sitting down and talking to you, you have to assume that that'll kind of trickle down the line to other free agents if he sees something in the team. So to me, I don't view it really as embarrassing at all. I think it was, if anything, it kind of lends credence to that the Sixers are legitimizing themselves to the point that, that they would gain at least respectability to the point that someone like LeBron would consider them. It's not like he wasn't taking a meeting with the Bucks or the Pacers, or he had a very few select set of teams in his mind, and the Sixers happen to be one of them. So I think, to me at least, it's not a victory or anything like that. It's not a moral victory, but it's certainly not an embarrassment.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain at The Real Mike KB on Twitter. He appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Michael, thanks for jumping on short notice there, pal.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.